Hello, this is High Priestess Tehila from the Covenant of the Open Mind, and I decided to do a new course. This will be just like the lecture series that we did for the Wicca and Witchcraft 101 series with homework assignments and everything. We do ask that if you're going to turn homework assignments in for feedback or reach out with like really detailed questions, or if you want me to work with you on interpreting your chart, that you join our coven. So you can find out how to do that on our coven page. I'll make sure I put the link to applying in the description. But yeah, so if you're interested in just knowing more about astrology and being able to do astrology for yourself, then this lecture is for you. We're going to talk in this video a bit about what astrology is and the history of astrology, and then in subsequent videos we'll cover the zodiac and and the planets and all the relevant things you need to know to be able to actually do astrology. So I guess I should start off by saying, what is astrology? Astrology is the study of the way the planets and their positions in the sky affect us here on Earth. Astrology can be about understanding how it affects the whole planet. It can be about understanding how it affects individual people throughout their whole life. Astrology was invented in Babylon. So it's very old. As you can see here, the original zodiac was written in cuneiform. So it's been around for a long time. It's been adapted and changed by a lot of different cultures, and it's evolved quite a bit throughout the years. So modern astrology is a little bit different than the original astrology that you see from Babylon, but it's very similar. It has a lot of heavy influences from Babylon, though like what doesn't? But so the exact year of invention is not known. We think it's somewhere around 2000 to 1000 BCE during what is called the Bronze Age in Mesopotamia. We don't know for sure because there was not like a very reliable form of writing system or records going back a long way. So it's possible that it existed as an oral tradition for tens of thousands of years for all we know. But we know for a fact that it surfaced around 2000, within the 2000 to 1000 BCE range. The Greeks adapted the system, as did the Hindus. So in 400 BCE, even as far as 700 BCE, you have Hindu philosophers writing about astrology and their own interpretation of it. The Greeks did so in, I think, 400 BCE, and their system is probably the most well documented and the one that's the real foundation for modern astrology, even though it is very heavily based off of Babylonian astrology. So the first Greek text known to use the 12 sign zodiac, was the Greek Anaphoricus by Hypsicles of Alexandria. So that's dated at 190 BCE. So as you can see, and there were references to the zodiac as far back, like I said, as like 300 to 400 BCE in Greece, but the references go back much farther in the Mesopotamian cultures. However, so Ptolemy laid the basis really for Greek and subsequently all Western astrology with his work Tetrabiblios, and he published that in the 2nd century CE. So like 400 years later. And many actually credit Ptolemy with discovering precession, but Hipparchus actually wrote about it first. He wrote about it in like 130 BCE, so like he was a hipster, he did astrology before it was cool. But Hindu astrologers wrote about planetary precession way before that, back in like the 700 BCE range. So really what you see is that astrology is something that has evolved in many parts of the world independently, but it all stems from one common source. Well, not all of it does, actually. So like Chinese astrology is kind of its own thing. So this is like Proto-Indo-European astrology. So the classical months, as we know them today, were actually invented by Julius Caesar, like around 0 BC, so like turn of the calendar system, right? So that's where our new calendar system came from. That's why it's called the Julian calendar, because it's invented by Julius Caesar. The leap year was actually added shortly after that by Augustus, so there was a while where the dates were proceeding throughout history. It was like really weird. So the modern calendar was invented more than 1,000 years after the creation of astrology and the discovery of the zodiac. So, as I said, because the zodiac comes from Mesopotamia, like thousands of years before, so notice that assigning arbitrary dates in this new calendar system kind of would potentially degrade the quality of the astrological system because it wasn't designed to handle this date system. Time used to be tracked in lunar months, not solar months. So the phase of the moon mattered more than the arbitrary lengths of time, like the distance of the sun moving around the year, and then that's just divided by 12, and then that's divided by, and each month has 30 or 31 days. Like, it's arbitrary, right? So lunar months are not arbitrary. So you just look at the sky, and whatever phase the moon is in, that's what day of the month it is. So lunar months do not line up with solar months, and they are not meant to. Meanwhile, while all these changes are happening, Ptolemy is writing about tropical versus sidereal astrology. So tropical astrology, the zodiac is divided into intersections of the ecliptic. So the ecliptic is the plane of our solar system on which all of the planets are located. So our solar system, you see, it looks like this, right? You have like the sun, and then you have like Earth, is here, and then you have like Mars, Jupiter, whatever goes out. So it's all like relatively flat, but the planets all do orbits that are like slightly off kilter from each other, right? So there's like a plane to our solar system on which you can find the planets. Like if you look up in the night sky, you can only find them within like something like this wide. And then as the seasons change and you go throughout the year, it moves like its shape based on where you are in the orbit, where the Earth is in the orbit around the sun. So, and even throughout the night, it can change a little bit. So the zodiac being divided into intersections of the ecliptic and the equator, forming 12 equal segments of 30 degrees apiece, would shift in relation to the backdrop of fixed stars. So it actually changes the date, it moves around the year. There's a really good tagline that I didn't include on the slide that I want to mention. So actually, let me, right, so, okay, now flip to the slide. So the tropical year is the time it takes for the sun to return to the spring equinox. The sidereal year is the time it takes the sun to return to a fixed star. So the idea is that you have these stars that are fixed that will appear to move against the zodiac signs. And you can either view the zodiac dates with reference to the fixed stars and where the Earth is in its orbit, like with regard to the fixed stars, or you can look at astrology in where the Earth is in its orbit around the sun. So those are your options. Hindu astrology most commonly uses sidereal, and Western usually sticks with tropical, but I'm going to talk about that more. So this phenomenon is called precession of the equinoxes. So the idea is that the equinoxes move through the zodiac, and later calculations, after planetary precession was discovered, later it was calculated that every 72 years, 1 degree is shifted. So this is the basis of astrological age, like the age that we're in, the age of Aquarius. Ages or eras are collections of years in which the spring equinox occurs in the same constellation each year. So if you do 72 years times 30 degrees, you get 2160 years per age. That is like the most basic arbitrary way to do this. That said, no one agrees about when each age formally starts. It's highly varied. Some say that it starts like 150 years after another group. Some will say that it starts at 0, like when Jesus was born or whatever. So all different ways of looking at it, okay? For that reason, because it's so arbitrary, to me, that says that we need to all kind of get together and put our heads together and come up with something that makes a little more sense. And that's exactly what this one person I'm going to reference on the next slide has done, so we'll talk about that. So if it's a purely tropical to start, like at an arbitrary year with equal length eras, if it's purely tropical system, then you start wherever you feel like starting, and then you just do each era is 2,160. Okay, and then you determine what era you're in based on that. And while this is popular, the system has a few problems. So one, it has nothing to do with actual space. So that doesn't, it doesn't mean that the spring equinox actually does occur within a certain constellation, right? Because you're not looking at the actual stars. You're just picking a random date and then deciding that's how long it is. And that it's because the constellations are not equal lengths. Like, you can divide them up into 30 because that's convenient, but in the night sky, they're all various sizes. So that doesn't accurately reflect where the planets actually are in their orbit around the sun. And the starting point in this one is totally random and arbitrary, so like, who gets to choose, right? That's a big problem. Everyone wants to use this tropical system of astrology, but there's no authority to decide, like, okay, but this is how we're doing it, right? So then you just get like 200 different interpretations of the same thing, which is fine. I mean, you can have whatever interpretation you want to have, but that bothers me personally because I'm a very scientifically minded person. So I want it to make, sense where it starts and make sure that it's, sticking with the scientific foundation of astrology, which we'll go further into in a few minutes. So right now we're in the age of Aquarius. Okay, this person here, and there's a link to, I'll put a link to this guy's website where I got these dates from here, or maybe it's in the homework, that's right, because it's really cool how he came to the conclusion of where the ages should start and end. And he actually does, the science based on how big each of the constellations is and how much time is actually spent in them, right? So you can see here that what the ages go like. So if you were to calculate it based on where in the sky, where in the year the equinox actually falls, then you would put the start of the age of Aquarius at 1836 and the end at 3276. Most people put the start of the age of Aquarius as like 1995, okay? But it's arbitrary. There's no reason why they would pick that. This one at least is based off of the position of the planets, actually. So I prefer this one, and I think this makes more sense, right? So the age of Aquarius is like the fall of religious doctrine and emotional action, and the rise of the new age of detachment from our emotions, and keeping religion out of politics and that sort of thing is all governed by Aquarius. So that kind of began more in the 1800s, and there was like a transitionary period, like through the late 1700s into the early, mid 1800s, and then it got more and more, throughout the 19th century, became a time of science and innovation and reason, and that's all, the energy of Aquarius. And many, many prominent authors do discuss the age of Aquarius. Doreen Valiant, Marcia Moore, and Albert Benjamin. These are not all Wiccan. Doreen Valiant is Wiccan. The other two are not. So many people from many different walks of life all believe in this age stuff. And I have a demo here that I want to watch. This shows you, and hopefully it's not way too loud. This shows you what precession of the equinoxes looks like, right? So this is the ecliptic plane that I mentioned, where all the planets are located, the plane of the solar system. And as the Earth rotates, there's the equatorial plane, that's the equator. So as it rotates around the year, the spring equinox occurs in a different constellation in time. So that's a good way to visualize. And so one cycle would be 26,000 years. And you can see how it moves through. So it has the Aries symbol. See that? Because Aries is considered to be the start of the zodiac, the zodiacal year. So Aries is the first sign, right? So showing the 0th point, the 0th degree moving around. Now this one does kind of put these at an arbitrary starting point, and it makes them all the same length. So it's doing some rounding. So it's really up to you how you would view it. So now we're in 12,000 AD, so you see that, so it moves all the way around. So I think that gives you a good idea of what we're talking about here when we say precession of the equinoxes. And the age of Aquarius and what that means. Planetary precession is a different type of precession. It's extremely important that you understand that these are different. There's a lot of math on this slide. I know it's like super scary when you see math, but I promise it's really not as scary as it might look. So Physics 101, Newton's laws of motion state that for every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction. So if you push on something, you get pushed one way and that thing gets pushed the other way. So think about if you're on ice, right? And you and your friend push off from each other. You slide one way and they slide the other. Right? You can't push off from them and then they don't move, right? So they're going to experience a force too. So gravity is just a force just like that. So gravity is when you take the gravitational constant, which is just a number that they got from experimentation, and then you multiply it by the mass of one object times the mass of another divided by the radius. So notice that the force of gravity depends on the distance the two objects have and the mass of the two objects. That's what the force of gravity depends on. So, you know, if you weighed a lot more, if you had a lot more mass than you have, then you might feel a stronger force of gravity than somebody else, right? So your mass is different than your weight, and that's why if you're in an elevator on a scale, your weight goes down and up as you move up and down in the elevator, because that, see, it's really cool, and you can like do an experiment. But for all intents and purposes here, all you need to know is that you are attracted to the earth, and the earth is attracted to you in equal but opposite reaction. So if you're attracted to the earth is attracted to you too. But because you're not very massive, you're not like displacing the earth by living on it, right? So that would be ridiculous. But planets are massive compared to people. So their pull matters. The sun is also massive. So as the planets orbit the sun does one of these. So if this is a planet orbiting the sun's going to move, you know, they're both basically going to orbit the center of mass, right? So the center of mass is here, right? Not like you see in the picture. The center of mass is right where this barycenter is. You have the little ball, that's the planet, and the big ball that's the sun. And so the center of mass is close to the sun, but not directly on the sun. And for that reason, the sun moves too. But now imagine that you have a bunch of massive planets orbiting around. So the sun's not just going in a neat little circle. The sun is going in like a squiggly mess that's called the wobble. And you can actually use the wobble to see how massive and how many numbers of planets exist in foreign galaxies and foreign solar systems. That's how they determine where these extraterrestrial planets that might contain alien life are located. So everything orbits the solar system center of mass, which is called the barycenter. It's not that important, they know that. But the important thing is that when an acceleration of massive objects, when the sun is accelerated in all these weird jerking directions, that generates something that's called gravitational waves, okay, things that can be measured. So waves, like literal waves, like imagine dropping a petal in a pond and then you see like waves, like ripples coming out of it. So like literally waves, but of gravitational energy, okay? So it's completely different than the waves you see in a pond, but it's the same exact thing that you can think in your head. The less mass that is involved and the lower the energy of the system, the fewer gravitational waves are produced and the lower their frequencies. So look at this picture here. This shows the gravitational waves that we have measured in our with our instruments today. Okay, the cosmic microwave background, that is like a fuck ton of gravitational waves. That's like the gravitational waves that come from the creation of the universe. Okay, so it's a lot of gravity. Then you have like pulsars. Those are like super massive objects out in space that are like circling, and every time they circle they have a bright light that goes like pulse. They're really massive. They're usually like black holes or something like that, right? So then you have compact objects that are captured by supermassive black holes, so things that are like orbiting around them or falling into them that will produce gravitational waves that you can measure. We can measure the binaries in our own galaxy. We can measure binary systems. That's like a one star orbiting another star. And we can also measure the gravitational waves from supernova, right? And they fall somewhere on the spectrum. Now, measuring the gravitational waves of the planets as they move around our sun would be very challenging. It's basically impossible to detect them right now. We don't have the instruments. They're not finely tuned enough. It's easier for us to determine the quantum fluctuations in the early universe than it is for us to measure the gravity waves coming from the system. But we know that they must exist, right? So from the math, from the theory, there are gravitational waves that get generated by the sun wobbling. We have no idea what effect they have on Earth, though. That's where the science stops, okay? So physics says, yes, as the planets orbit, the sun wobbles, that produces gravitational waves, which we would hypothetically be able to feel, which may or may not affect us, but there's no way for us to determine how they would affect us because we can't really measure, A, we can't really measure the gravitational waves on that level, and B, we don't really have the technology to understand what's going on inside our own minds on the level, on the scale that we would need to. I mean, we're talking about like on the neurotransmitter, like the single particle scale, right? So our brains are a quantum system that's like with single electrons, but because there's so many particles, like we don't have the technology to measure this. Eventually, maybe one day we could verify this. So astrology is falsifiable. So in that way, it could be seen actually as at least a valid scientific hypothesis. But it's not really scientific in the sense that the evidence that supports like how these different gravitational waves affect us would be basically entirely based on anthropological evidence, and that's not typically very reliable. So even like psychology or sociology is a good example of one that's like a soft science, right? So it's something that it's not very easy to like prove things using experimentation. So how can the planets affect us? Planets are massive, planets orbit an even more massive sun. Okay, this causes wobbling in the solar system. So this is a picture for those more scientifically minded of the wobble. See how the ecliptic moves throughout the years. So the direction of the sun after 20,000 years is different than the direction of the sun now. It moves up and down. So the planets move slightly in the ecliptic, and different constellations might be included in the ecliptic at different times. So like 2,000 years ago, when this astrology stuff was built out, Ophiuchus was in the zodiac technically, but the planets spent such little time in it that they didn't care about it. Now you can have Ophiuchus as a sun sign. Okay, and it's a new zodiacal sign that's not documented and that many people just flat out reject because change is scary and hard. But I personally think that it's something that we do need to consider. So we feel gravitational waves from the wobble, and that has some effect on us that can be characterized. And the ecliptic path moves over many years, changing the dates, which is why relying completely on the tropical system can often cause less accurate readings. And here's a comparison of the dates for your information. So you'll recognize the tropical zodiac dates, 21st through 20th, 21st through 21st, 22nd through 21st, right? So these are the 30-day periods that everyone is used to. The sidereal zodiac, this is from the Hindu system of astrology, is closer. So look, 15 April to 15 May. When the sun is in this Aries constellation, it's actually in it from the 19th of April to the 13th of May. Now, this AIU boundaries depends on where you're located on the planet, because different latitudes see different amounts of the ecliptic, and that can affect where things are located. Most of the time, though, this IAU column is pretty accurate. But notice this, so the solar stay is the number of days that is spent in each constellation. So 25 days in Aries, 37 days in Taurus, 31 days in Gemini. So Scorpio is only for 7 days, right? So the sun is in Ophiuchus for 18 days now. It used to be like 20-some days in Scorpio and then like 5 or 6 days in Ophiuchus, right? So little they didn't care. But now the opposite is true. So you have to take into account that some of the influence that we perceive Scorpio to have might actually come from the sign Ophiuchus, and people just don't notice or care because they reject it, because Ophiuchus is the loneliest zodiac sign, even though it's like been on the zodiac for thousands of years. But so that's really interesting. So there are different probabilities of being found in different zodiacal signs. So you'll find that, you know, but that doesn't seem to matter. There's still a pretty even spread of all these different ones. You know, it's some are more common than others because people have more sex at certain times of the year than others, right? So very interesting kind of to look at and think about. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about how there's different types of astrology. There's hooray astrology. That's where you answer questions based on what time the question is posed or when the question occurred to the seeker. Electional, which is also called event astrology, uses astrology to predict like good dates and times for planned events. So if you're thinking like, should I do my ritual? I want to do my ritual on the waning moon because my ritual is about banishment. But what's the best time of the waning moon? Then you could turn and look at astrology and be like, oh, if I do this on May 1st instead of April 30th, then the moon is in Scorpio, and Scorpio is a good sign for manipulating energy and binding people. And that's kind of what I'm doing here, to banish this person. So I'll do it on the day when the moon is in Scorpio. So that would be the kind of thing that you do for electional. Or you could say like, we're having a hand fasting. What's the best day for a hand fasting? Hooray is like, okay, I want to know the answer to this divination question, and it occurred to me at like 3:27 p.m. on April 15th. So I'll just do a chart for that date and time, and then I'll interpret that in a way that answers my question. Kind of like you would interpret like any kind of divination, like a tarot card spread. But you could also put like the zodiac on a piece of paper and then throw stones at it too. And you can actually make the zodiac look the way it's supposed to based on what time and date it is, and then throw stones at it too. And you can mix it. Like I've done that. It's really good. And that's hooray astrology is really awesome. If you're trying to determine like when something is going to happen, both hooray and electional can be used for this. So like if you want to know, and mundane is about this too, like when will certain events of geographical regions, places, or countries in the whole world happen? So on a not individual level, what is going on in the stars that causes certain events. So like one time I had a dream about a big flood. And so I was like, okay, well, when is this disaster going to happen? And I did runes that showed me that it was a natural disaster that's cause of climate change, right? So I assumed it was probably going to be a flood or a typhoon or something like that. And then I did astrology to find out when it would happen. And I noticed a bunch of planets were retrograde at a certain time and when the retrogrades would peak, and based on what constellation they were in and all this stuff, I eventually said, okay, this is going to happen like a couple days after, like on the next new moon or whatever, this is going to happen. And I think it was the really bad storm that decimated Puerto Rico, and it happened like 2 days after the full moon or the new moon or whatever it was. I can't remember now. It was last year. But so that's the kind of thing that you would use mundane astrology for, is like predicting like big events in the world, basically. When they're going to happen, not usually necessarily what's going to happen, but when. Astrology is very good at answering the question of when. So natal charts, that's the most common one, that uses a birth date, a time, and a location to determine aspects of an individual's personality and their life path. So what are they like? It's a blueprint only. It's not like, it's like, what are they like and where are they going? But obviously they can still have free will and choose to do different things. That's just more like their spiritual genetics. So your astrology chart is like your spiritual genetics, and your body and your actual genetics is like your physical genetics. So like you are probably predisposed to be skinny, fat, big, small, whatever, but you can usually change that. You know, you can wear high heels, or you can work out to change the fact that your whole family is fat and become like super brawly, right? So there's, just because it's in your chart and you have certain genetic predispositions doesn't mean that necessarily will govern your reality. Medical astrology is usually combined with one of these other forms. It can often be used on its own. It's used to determine where problems may arise in someone's body. So it can predict, like, you're going to have knee problems, so you should avoid contact sports, in your early life, because if you get any injuries, you're going to need knee replacements. They could do something like that. So that's another really interesting aspect of astrology. And you could also use astrology to try to find out what's wrong with a person, like especially mental health issues. It can work. Like if you have someone's natal chart and then you look at what planets are retrograde and where things are in the sky, that can sometimes tell you why they're having issues right now in the current moment. Now, esoteric versus traditional astrology, these are two big categories. Esoteric differs from traditional astrology because it's not about physical or mundane stuff at all. It's just about the spiritual self, seeking spiritual enlightenment, karma, that sort of thing. So each of the associations of the signs, instead of the planets being like, okay, this is your conscious self, this is your subconscious self, it's like, okay, this is your spirit, this is your something else, this is aligns with your something chakra, or like something like that. So in this one, the planets have different meanings, and it's more about your journey to enlightenment than anything else. Okay, so now getting into the actual astrology. So this is traditional astrology. It's mostly Western. It's largely influenced by Greek and Babylon, like I said in the beginning, and it's evolved for many, many years. This is what's called the flat wheel. So almost nobody's chart actually looks like this. But if you look at it, the houses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those don't move. Okay, the planets that rule those houses don't move, and the houses and the signs that rule those houses don't move. But the symbols on the outside would move. Now, when I do a star chart, I don't exactly represent it this way because it can get confusing with all these words on the chart. But know that each house is ruled by a sign and a planet, and that will give you some idea as to what the energy of the house is. So, for example, the third house governs expression, self-expression, communication. It's governed by Mercury and Gemini, right? Air planet, air sign, all about communication and opening up, and Geminis are charming and romantic and eloquent, and Mercury governs communication, and Mercury retrogrades make everyone's life suck a lot so, with communication via like email and computers and stuff. So you have, that's what the house means. Now each side of it it's divided up into like meridians, and meridians are east and west, and hemispheres, northern and southern. And you'll notice this looks kind of backward, but it's because it's like trying to take a three-dimensional shape and put it here on this two-dimensional form. So it actually does make sense. So the ones that are below, the ones that are in the northern hemisphere are, I always mix this up. The idea is that that one half of this is visible. They're up, they're in the night sky, and the other half is not. So the one that goes in the first house is the sign that's rising, and I'll show you what that means later on when we talk about rising signs. And then you fill in the houses from there. Okay, so I know this sounds like really overwhelmingly confusing, but just know that we're going to go into each part of this in great detail. So for now, just copy down what it means that there's meridians and hemispheres. The signs that are in the northern hemisphere, they reflect you and your self-reflection. So if you have a lot of signs in the bottom half of your chart here and it forms like a bowl, then that means that you tend to be a little more selfish. You're more about understanding yourself and growing as a person and less about helping other people, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? The best thing for you to do is to become your best self. And if that means that you tend to care more about yourself and less about other people, and then you get farther in life and then you give back later on, or you don't give back at all because it doesn't really suit you, but you have a really happy family and you raise your kids right, and you're a contributing member of society, like who cares, right? So that's just what it means about you, okay? It's not a statement on whether or not you're a good or bad person. Then you have the upper half of the chart. Those signs reflect the public collective, giving back, being selfless, etc. Then you have the signs down, split down the center, the signs over, you know, in the west meridian. Those represent the light, and the other side, the shadow. So the sides, you know, so that is a way to think about it too, where like the light is like more like these are obvious. People on the left side are going to be, or on the right side are going to be more extroverted, more outgoing, more bold, you know. And then on the left side, you have people that are probably more easygoing, who, you know, have layers of themselves, that sort of thing. Okay, so there's 3 things to keep in track when you're doing astrology: modalities, polarities, and elements. And pretty much the meaning of every single sign in the chart pulls from its modality, polarity, and element. So the polarity is either masculine or feminine, push and pull, like yin and yang, okay? It's aggression, positivity, outgoingness, the light side, and the yin side, the negative, the moon, the darkness, the passive, the giving, the receiving side. It has nothing to do with gender, sexual orientation. It doesn't even have anything to do with, well, it has more to do with sex, I guess. It's based on biology, right? It's based on how testosterone makes you aggressive, and estrogen, it does the opposite. And it's based on, you know, just the way that these forces of push and pull come together to form life. That's what it's based on, okay? This was before they had anything like gender identity, so don't read too much into it. The 3 modalities are cardinal, fixed, and mutable. Cardinal represents beginnings. It's a catalyst, you know, the energy gathering. Okay, so think of like early spring, like Candlemas, or Ostara, when you're invoking like Bridget and those kinds of deities. That's like cardinal energy, right? Like the beginning of the year, the very start of spring. Then fixed energy is like stubborn, strong, and unyielding, and that would be like, you know, the heat of summer. And then you have mutable energy, which is cyclical and dynamic and transforming, and that represents like, you know, how in the fall everything gets really pretty, transforms into death, and then fades, and then comes back the following year and it's reborn. So mutability is death and rebirth. Then you have the 4 elements. We know all about the 4 elements now: earth, air, fire, and water. I hope people know about those from my other videos. Each element contains the modalities of the others. So cardinal earth is different than fixed earth. Okay, see how you can derive what the energy is now. So you have the first quadrant. You have Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. So like if we go back here, Aries is a fire sign. It's the fire of earth, because Taurus is the fixed sign in the quadrant. So this quadrant belongs to earth. It aligns with earth. So Aries is the fire of earth, Taurus is the earth of earth, and Gemini is the air of earth. Okay, so Aries is like a volcano, like lava sitting inside a volcano, ready to erupt. Okay, it's engineering, pioneering, it's innovative, it's anger. Okay, it's like trapped emotions that suddenly come out like, okay, that's what it is. So then you have Taurus. Taurus is the earth of earth, so it's really stubborn and unyielding, but it's nurturing and protective. Okay, like think of it like a cave. A cave would be aligned with Taurus, okay? You go inside a cave and it gives you shelter and it keeps you warm and dry and it's nurturing, but like you can't just like dig a hole easily through a cave, okay? So then you have Gemini. Gemini is the air of earth. So that means that it's someone who goes from being like a total airhead to being like very stubborn and grounded. So someone who is adaptable to any situation, someone who is versatile and all that sort of thing. So you can derive the themes of each of these all from which modality and element they align with. So then you have cardinal earth. Okay, cardinal earth is Capricorn, right? Because it's the first element in the quadrant. So it's in Aquarius, is an air sign. So it's the earth of air. So it's the opposite of the air of earth, right? And notice how it's directly opposite Gemini. So it is literally the opposite. Yeah, so that's how it works. Then you can talk about your signs. So your signs are where the planets are located at the time and date of your birth. And if you notice, that's like super unique. Like it's very rare that you see two people with the exact same signs. Like, so I know someone, who's a good friend of mine, who has the same birthday as me, 9/9/91. But he was born in Scorpio and I was born in Pisces, different times of the day. So we have nothing in common. We have some things in common, but then we have a lot of things that are not. They're super different. And that's because, you know, all of our planets are in different signs because of the different rising signs. So your rising sign is actually your most important sign, not your sun sign, contrary to what they would say in pop astrology. Pop astrology is what I call the astrology that doesn't give a fuck where the signs actually are in space. So if you don't actually care where the planets are in space, then you just don't care about the scientific basis of astrology. And that's fine. If you want to do things that way, you're welcome to. But in my experience, it's not accurate. And I talk about that in another slide. So the sun sign is your conscious self. It's who you want to be. It's your strengths, your self-awareness. Your moon sign, that's your emotions, receptivity, your subconscious self, your imagination, your intuition, how you feel things, how you receive things. The rising sign is your true self, the core of you, who you are when no one is looking. And then the solar house, because the dates have shifted and the ecliptic is different than where it was initially, you can actually still incorporate the tropical signs by using a solar house. So if you are a sun sign, what's a good example? If you are a sun sign Taurus, but your solar house is Aries because you're right in that period of dates that's like between the two signs, and in one system you would be an Aries and in another system you'd be a Taurus, then how you can interpret that is people will see you as a Taurus. They'll see you as being level-headed and down to earth and all that sort of thing, but they won't know that you are also a hothead who can, you know, suddenly freak out or that sort of thing. So their ability to perceive who you are will be mismatched because your solar house doesn't match your sun sign. Okay, so note that, you know, because we've been talking about this now, it's very obvious. All the planets matter. You have to read the chart in its entirety. You can't just be like, okay, well, my sun sign is blah, so this is everything there is to know about me. Like, no, that's not how it works. You can do that, but you're going to have to make really broad statements that can apply to anyone. And I hate that. When I do an astrology reading for someone, it's very specific. It's a chart that could not apply to anyone. It could only apply to you. So one sign meant one thing in another chart. It may mean something different depending on the planetary alignment. So the planets are like actors, and they wear the signs as costumes. There's 7 elder planets: the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Those are the ones that they knew about from a very early age in human history. They're visible with the just the naked eye. But then there's 3 higher resonance planets. These were discovered later on. They align with Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, respectively. And the idea is that when we discovered these high resonance planets, then the human race was evolved enough for them to impact us. Until then, we hadn't evolved enough for them to even matter. So the fact that we didn't know about them before doesn't matter, because now they matter. Right? That's how most astrologers view it. Okay, retrograde motion, that's an important topic to cover in an overview. Retrograde motion means that the planet appears to move backwards for a period of time because of its position and orbital speed. So because of the rate that it's moving, based on how Earth is moving, bear in mind that we're all orbiting the same sun at different rates, okay, it'll appear to move backwards. So if you see this GIF here, it's moving forward, it's moving forward, it's moving forward. Suddenly, because of the way that the planets are moving with respect to each other, it appears to move backwards. So when it does that, it's brighter. It's like brighter in the night sky. Like you literally see it is brighter. And that amplifies the energy and influence of that planet. So when Mercury is retrograde, that affects communication because it's amplified, right? So Mercury governs communication, and when Mercury is retrograde, then you might have really good communications, like stuff that you really need, or it can interfere with your ability to communicate. It can interfere with your ability to like send emails. People could misinterpret things that you said, and that's all just the influence of Mercury being retrograde. Okay, so getting the data for a chart. For this, you have to ensure that you pull accurate dates depending on your preferred system. If you want to use one of the more classic astrology systems, go ahead. Reach out to someone who uses them, or find an astrology website and something that'll give you the charts themselves, and it's easier, and you're welcome to do that. From my experience, using the tropical dates alone, the conventional dates, is just not accurate. I did 10 readings for people I didn't know. I had never seen them. I used the traditional dates, like the alignment of the planets as they would be, based on the calculations that are done without planetary precession, and none of the charts were accurate. People told me that I was just terrible at this, or that they didn't believe in astrology, and they were disappointed, and some charts were completely irrelevant. So I think the sidereal system is closer to the actual dates. So if you're going to use one where you just have the dates written down, I would use the sidereal system. But it still leaves a constellation off. It ignores Ophiuchus. And you're welcome to do that. Many people have ignored Ophiuchus for a very long time. So if you want to be just like all those people, you're welcome to. Okay? But in my experience, Ophiuchus and Scorpius are distinctly different from each other and have distinct energies. Most of my readings that I've done hundreds of readings now, like many hundreds, and they are all based on verifiably accurate astronomical data, and people say to me that it's spooky accurate. Like, they can't believe what I'm able to tell them about themselves based on the time and date and location of their birth. So, and many of these people, again, I had never met or even seen. They were for random people on the internet. So in my experience, it definitely matters, and you should get the accurate information. That said, how do you get accurate information? Stellarium. Stellarium is a free app for PC. It's also, it's only $2.50 one-time fee to get it on your phone, so it's a really good app. This is what it looks like when you open it. You have to put the constellation lines, like turn them on, and then you can see them, okay? So in order to determine the rising sign, you'd look over at the horizon and see, oh, okay, so right now Cancer is rising. So if this is for someone who is born right now, then Cancer would be in the first house, and then everything else would go from there. Okay, here's the moon. You can click on the moon. This tells you the phase of it. So if I pull up over here in this date time window, if I pull this up and go, and I'm going to do a whole lecture on just this eventually, but if I do like change the date, one day, now the phase has gone up, right? So phase going up, oh, here it comes, full moon. See that? So you can see when the full moon was anytime throughout history. You can even watch retrograde motion. Like if I were to play this at a very high speed like this, and that's too high, and I like zoomed in on one planet, then I would be able to see if it was moving retrograde or not. That's the idea. Usually I don't put it that fast though. Usually I actually just pause it. Then you can also put someone's location in. It has lots of locations, and if it doesn't have it, you could always use latitude and longitude. You put someone's location in, you find out the date, and then you can see where the planets are in the sky and where the sun is. You can do control find and then type sun. Okay, so the sun is actually in between Aries and Taurus right now, which would mean this person would probably have some influence of both of them in their sun sign, and it's May 11th, I think, by the traditional dates, that's actually the month of Taurus. I'm not sure, I'd have to look in my book of shadows, so whatever. So the solar house would be, Taurus or something, and that would all be factored in. So I'm going to do, when we talk about reading the charts, I'm going to do this whole process from start to finish and show you it, but I just wanted to show you that Stellarium is, what it is and how cool it is. Stellarium is like what you use when you're trying to line up a telescope. So it's as accurate as you can get, literally. If it was any less accurate, then you would miss what you were trying to view in the telescope by like hundreds of millions of miles. Space is really big. So yeah, so that's Stellarium, and I'll do another lecture later on in the same series that shows you exactly how to get the astro chart out of Stellarium from start to finish. And I'll give you like a template file that I use, so that you should be totally empowered to do a reading yourself from start to finish by the end of this lecture series. Because of my failure with the Wicca 101, the Wicca and Witchcraft 101 series to stick to actually doing a video once a week or something like that, I decided this time I'm too chaotic for that. I'm not going to even bother. I don't know how many lectures this will wind up being, but I will cover in the future. I will cover the zodiac. That's next. Then we'll cover what the planets are. So we're going to talk about what each sign is and what it means. That might be a slightly longer lecture. It might be like closer to 2 hours. I might do it in 2 lectures. We'll see how it goes. Then we'll talk about the planets and what they they mean, then the houses, then the aspects. Then I'll actually go over from start to finish how to read and interpret a natal chart, how to pull it out of Stellarium, read it, interpret it, etc. We'll do one from start to finish. I'll like do mine or something so you can see how it works. Then we'll talk about electional astrology and divination, and I'll talk a little bit more about how you can use astrology to predict when things are going to happen, like I mentioned earlier in the lecture. We'll do a whole lecture on that, and then we'll do a whole one that talks about medical astrology and how you can use this astrology to determine what issues someone is having and that sort of thing, and how you can actually use astrology to help other people improve themselves. I will have homework for this course as well. There's a book that you can find a PDF for online, and it's called The Astrology Book by James R. Lewis. It was really hard for me to find a good astrology book. It was really hard. So this is the best one I could find. I don't agree with everything this person said. I think that the biggest problem with most astrologers is that they are trying to turn something which is decidedly not a science into a science. Astrology is an art. It requires a lot of interpretation, your own perspective. You should basically read a bunch of different astrology books, a bunch of different interpretations of what the signs mean, listen to my interpretations, and then just like throw all of that away, meditate on the zodiac, and decide for yourself what the signs mean, because it's an art, okay? There's no one right way to interpret these things. But the most important thing is to make sure you're using accurate astrological information. Otherwise, it's basically just guessing. It's basically just you reading a person empathetically and then explaining away what your readings are using the planets. If you want it to be more scientific than that, and you really want to be capable of saying big, bold, specific statements without worrying if they're correct or not, then I'm telling you, you've got to know where the planets really are in the sky. It's just crucial. So here I have an overview on precession. This is by a Christian philosopher, John Pratt. He's very Christian. So if that bothers you, just read the first couple sections, like section 1, and then don't go into the part that relates it to the Bible. I read the whole thing. I found it very interesting, but not everyone is like me. So section 1 talks about how he calculated the age, where the ages should stop and start, and planetary precession, and precession of the equinoxes, not planetary precession, that's something else. So he talks a lot about that. Then I would read the introduction to the astrology book. Like I said, I don't always agree with this guy, but it is a very good, different perspective than mine. A lot of what he says is very factual. He can be a bit verbose. It's long, so skim it. Okay, parts about getting online software. If you don't want to use Stellarium, that's a great thing for you to read, though, because he'll give you recommendations that I can't give you. I just use Stellarium. I'm a physicist. I use accurate astronomical data. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. Find a system that works for you. Download it, Stellarium, whatever you need to do. Get an app that gives you the astrology dates, because we will need that in the future homeworks as we work through this course. So whatever you're going to use, get it, learn how it works, and that sort of thing. If you're going to use Stellarium, I will go through an entire tutorial for that later on. So yeah, so that's it. So this is the first lecture for Astrology 101. If you guys have any questions and you want to reach out, you can always email covenoftheopenmind@gmail.com. If you plan on doing the homework and you are in the coven and you want to turn the homework in and get feedback, you're welcome to. You don't have to. But if you're not in the coven, then consider joining before you decide to spam us with emails about homeworks. And yeah, and thank you for watching. From everyone here at the Coven of the Open Mind, blessed be.